somebody who would perhaps kidnap me and hold me to ransom for money, they would be subject to the most instant and permanent punishments by my customers. I knew it was police because of the methodical tapping, the banging of their sledgehammers. We've got all day. I suppose the judge particularly hated me because we used to sing to the jury during the lunch break. I'm not that kind of guy. Even when I saw that glow from dawn at the top of that prison in Bangkok, even if I failed then, at least I felt free at that moment. But I stopped all that nonsense and made it my business to get over that wall, slid down. Hi, I'm David McMillan. I didn't want to be, but by the time I found out, it was too late. This is my story. In my late teens and early 20s, I had some regular jobs. I was a cameraman for a while and then worked in a big ad agency and finally a cinema. And it was there that I met the family of some, retired villains. They'd been safecrackers and did some selected robberies, but found themselves with some money to invest, and narcotics was where they saw best. And when it comes to narcotics, importing is where the real profit is. So that meant smuggling. But this was not really their kind of thing. It's one thing to put a gun in somebody's face and demand money, but getting through borders, well. Now, I was not the kind of person who liked to wave guns around, but the idea of crossing a forbidden zone, this artificial line in the sand, where there was a team waiting for you, and how would you get through since they'd built this thing, the airports, the security, the customs line, built it so that you couldn't? Well, my arrogance and stubbornness drew me into that, and I couldn't resist it. That's the way I felt. When the smuggling operations were at their height, there was traffic between Colombia and South America and Thailand up the Golden Triangle, sometimes mixing between the two. The smuggling operations involved building a different personality for the courier. I had my own passports. I probably used maybe 30 of them during a long career. But I would get a fresh passport for the courier, not just for the practical reason that there would be no background known, but so they could be absorbed into this fantasy life that they were living. Of course, I was there. I'd be the one looking around to see if they were in danger. Sometimes I would even have a second person traveling that was perhaps a little bit more suspicious who would go through first. And if that person got dived on, well, so be it. He had nothing. And the courier would go next. I would go last. Really, because if something went wrong, I could then go out and try and fix everything. The authorities, certainly back in those days, I don't know whether they'd be brave enough to do it now, would not take the cargo away from them. They would leave it with the courier and then go in hope of getting the Mr. Biggs. The courier would be put in a fake taxi with a fake driver, and police of course, and taken to the place where the meeting was meant to happen. If it was in a restaurant, that's fine, but there were other places. But the point is, that cargo would never get to the restaurant. It would be intercepted by sometimes a guy on a motorcycle or a bag switch in the restaurant. But there would be a little play ahead as soon as they were caught. If I sound peculiarly enthusiastic or arrogantly pleased recounting these events, I suppose that only reveals the attraction for it. It wasn't really the money, because I ended up with really nothing. I found things to spend it on, or gave it away, or went into some mad investment. But it was the getting through, the devising the methods, even working on the containers. smoothing out the lines, getting the wood to match on the corners, buffing away that hairline join. And you might think, why, this is one sick puppy here. I mean, doesn't he realize that it was narcotics, usually A-class, high-level drugs? We'd have to go back quite a way, 30 years, maybe longer. There was a very different attitude when I was in my late teens and early 20s. In the 70s and certainly early 80s, we weren't really the outlaws, the scum of today. There was a view that the law on drugs was wrong. That was our excuse. I think we were just criminal. But that's not the point. We were not regarded as the filth of the world. So it was not so hard to get people to join the party. Any enjoyment I had in smuggling was shattered with the major arrests. My first big arrest was in Australia. It was a result of a major task force operation that ran for 2 years with a lot of specialised police. They were federal and state. And I was warned. My own lawyer called me in and said, they're all over you, David, you better go. And I mentioned arrogance before, and it was the same then. I thought, here's another border, but it's different. They're right on me now. So I was working on counter-surveillance measures and meeting up with the people who were following me. By the way, when you confront somebody who's tailing you, don't think that the whole operation's all over. The fact is, they just don't tell their bosses. When you go up and hand them a bag of lunch and say something about it being a long day for us both, your shadows, those people tailing you, will get embarrassed, annoyed, but they won't call it all off because they'll keep it a secret. It all just goes on. At the time of this major arrest in Australia, I was living in a beachside house, rented, kind of good. It had a swimming pool. I had my German Shepherd, Sasha. She was always a great protector and house dog. In fact, I think there was a warning of that coming. My wife at the time, the daughter of an Italian restaurateur, we used to go to her father's place on Sundays. We went there this Sunday, and Sasha, the dog, wouldn't get back in the car. The dog was really, didn't want to travel. Sasha, there was nothing here. There's nothing coming. 6 o'clock the next morning, I heard the sound of sledgehammers battering down the door. I knew it was police because of the methodical tapping, the banging of their sledgehammers. We've got all day. They came in, poured in SWAT team outfits. Sasha looked up from the floor, and that dog more or less said to me, "Well, David, I told you so. What kind of warning do you need?" The trial went on for 6 months, 119 witnesses, 6,000 pages of telephone intercepts. That's recordings of conversations. We tried to get bail for the girls. It was the girls, Michael, my partner's wife, Marie, she was Colombian. Just had a baby, and Claire, and this was, we couldn't have them there, so we were really to even plead to this case. But they were held in the women's prison. Police informer was put in their midst in the dormitory. She was meant to get information out of them. Danielle, her name was. Unfortunately, she was an arsonist, set fire to the place in a ludicrous protest inside a wooden building covered in steel cages. I heard about the fire while I was in a very old-fashioned prison cell, before TVs, modern things. I ran out in the morning from the cell, spoke to an officer I knew. He was looking everywhere. I knew what that meant. And my wife, Clelia, was dead. My business partner, Michael's wife, Marie, was dead. I like to think it wasn't... I like to think it wasn't too bad, like suffocating. Chloe's parents were pretty good about it, really. If I was her dad, I wouldn't have wanted to kill me. He said, oh, she was a bit of a tearaway. She liked making trouble. He forgave me. Because there was no great seizures in the case, it was a real battle. They came back and acquitted me of 11 of the 12. But the judge hated me. I suppose the judge particularly hated me because we used to sing to the jury during the lunch break. A cappella songs. I think it was the Nylons hit, I'm Not That Kind of Guy. The result of the case was a 15-year sentence, which meant 10 years in prison. One of the mad things about returning to smuggling, and after my 10-year sentence, I did. Why? I can give you a million excuses, no, but because that's what I knew, I suppose. That's where there was some comfort. That's where I could hide behind other identities. I'd left Australia and I was heading towards Europe because I had a little money put aside there. I had new papers, new passport. I stopped in Thailand to pick up a little bit more money. And in 10 years since I'd been there, but my old business partner still had something for me. I felt so light-headed when I arrived there because nobody knew who I was. I felt like I should really just stay there. My old business partner from 10 years ago said, David, don't be in such a hurry. Stay here. Nobody knows my house. Just relax. But the old thing of sticking to the schedule just was locked into place. I went to the airport. They were waiting. I could see them on the top railings. There were guys looking down. The uniformed officers were making a point of not looking at me. That was worse. Of course they look at passengers. That's their job. I slipped out sideways. At an airport, you can, as long as you get in the opposite place to where you're supposed to be, don't go down to arrivals and join them. There's a big crowd. There's a queue thing with the taxis. Stay upstairs with the people coming into that airport. Then you can grab something out of sequence. This was Bangkok. I took a taxi to Chinatown. I got out of there. I went to 2 hotels. I made a couple of phone calls. I know what you're thinking. David, you just got through talking about communications. What are you doing on the phone? You're right. And then they knew it. And when I stepped into the travel agency, 3 Thai plainclothes officers arrested me. In a Thai prison, you're never alone. You're in dormitories built for, 60, and there's 200 in there, lying on the floor, sandwiched like sardines. Many people in chains, those facing death penalty. I was facing the death penalty. What was it? I think it was, they found 20 grams of heroin somewhere in a bit of a sweep at the airport. I did point out that if it had been mine, it would have probably been a lot more. And the escape from the Thai prison was probably the longest night of my life and the most exhausting. It was an old school kind of escape because telling anybody would have proved fatal. I'd had Michael, my old business partner, send me a care package with 4 hacksaw blades concealed in a huge amount of very distracting materials. Cigarettes to give to the guards and pornography that would shock them, but I got my hacksaw blade and started cutting after midnight. I'd only got through 1 bar after about 2 hours. It's different at night. Anybody thinking of escaping, there's no use pacing out how long you think things will take during daylight. At night, you can hear a pin drop. Even if there's a bit of background noise from other cells, you touch a hacksaw blade on an old steel bar from a prison cell. It screams in protest as you drag it along. You have to go slowly. Half a bar was cut in 2 hours. Should I go that night? Or do what I knew was fatal? When it comes to escaping, don't hesitate. Go with every opportunity that comes your way. And my big Swedish Viking friend Sten held back that bar and gave me 6 inches, which I slipped through and got out and slid to the ground on some nylon webbing that I'd got from one of the factories there. It was before Google Earth back in those days. 1996 in August it was, the 26th. By the time I'd stumbled myself around to what luckily was an outside wall, very high, too high, with electric wiring along the top and a ladder that I'd had to make out of bamboo poles, gaffer tape, some picture frames forming the rungs of the thing all taped up together. It was almost dawn. Oddly enough, I thought even when I saw that glow from dawn at the top of that prison in Bangkok, even if I failed then, at least I felt free at that moment. But I stopped all that nonsense and made it my business to get over that wall, slid down, took out my prop from my kit bag, which was an umbrella from the umbrella factory, and kept my white face well hidden under that as I walked under the guard towers. Got a couple of taxis, went to the airport, picked up a passport that a friend had very carefully left for me. I fled to Pakistan, Balochistan, to my friend from many years ago from the 70s, me and Ojan Magsi of the Baluchi Magsi clan. And only then I knew I was safe. I found myself, as the guest of the tribal lord, looking at some new passports on a bed there. Should I stay or should I go? Should I throw myself back into it? But really, there wasn't an awful lot of choice. I'd used up many favors escaping from the Thai prison, escaping from a certain death sentence. I think they would have forgiven me if I'd have said, look, it's all been too much. I can't go on. So you've just caught me making another excuse for myself. I did go on, and I went back to it. And was that the last of the arrests? No. People have sometimes asked me, looking at me, how did you survive where you were dealing with cocaine and heroin in a marketplace that's ruthless and cutthroat? But one of the keys to the survival of that was being worth more alive than dead. My customers, as it were all crooks. And of course, my well-being was important. It was necessary for me to be alive, to be doing the smuggling so they could make their profits. So anybody else from their world who would come to attack me, somebody who would perhaps kidnap me and hold me to ransom for money, someone who would come and follow me and try and steal the goods, they would be subject to the most instant and permanent punishments by my customers. So I didn't have to worry about that. At the peak of the business, did I have any fast cars and flash houses? Really, I was too busy running the thing, because that was the interesting part, that was the exciting part, to even think that far ahead. I recall having a glass coffee table in a house I was renting. There was perhaps $2 million on that glass coffee tabletop. I never really got to spend it. I put some back into the operations, I buried some in the ground, and if you turned around and looked in the rest of the house, only half of it was furnished. I hadn't even furnished the house properly. Sure, there were a couple of things were expensive that were bought, but they were toys of part of the profession. I took an old Cortina XLE and put a Chevy 327 engine into it to see how fast we could get a car which looked like a normal car but could tear up the highway, on the excuse that it was necessary for evil trade getaways. But there was no great pleasure. I retired from all of that world because I grew too old, and that was over 15 years ago now. But it never really goes away. A couple of policemen arrived one day. They had a warrant. They wouldn't say what it was for, But I got to know that it was for Westminster Court. I called my lawyer. I said, "What, Westminster? What is it, parking tickets?" I can't think. He said, "David, they do terrorism cases or extradition." And then the penny dropped. That's what they were there for. I was taken away and held in Wandsworth prison pending extradition hearings to Thailand. And that was for the 25-year-old drugs case. I was fighting that extradition for almost 2 years. And strangely enough, the Thais were winning. The judge wasn't terribly sympathetic to me. I was held without bail at Wandsworth, and I hadn't been in a jail for some time, especially a British one, and it was granted to them. They were allowed to take me back. Of course, I appealed straight away, and I was still in Wandsworth wondering how that would go, and starting to formulate B plans of what to do in case I was taken back there. But what struck me as odd was that they knew I would be killed there. The Thais knew I would never survive. The next generation of prison guards had been affected by my escape, and some of them had lost their job. I would be finished in that. I would be chained to a wall. I would meet with an accident, if I can put it that way. But the only satisfactory way out was for them to win the case through the Home Secretary, but withdraw it somehow. And so it was agreed in the end. The Home Secretary signed ahead on my extradition. The Thai stepped forward and said, "It's too late. Too much time has passed, and this warrant has run out." Why? Because they wanted to be all punctilious and exacting about the law? No, the Thais didn't want me back there because they knew I wouldn't survive more than a couple of months. And having made all those guarantees to the UK government, well, it would be an embarrassment. So let David stay in the UK. But we won't, so we're happy.